and let's talk about some applications for leadership. So here's what we're going to do. I'll ramble a little bit about applications for leadership on what we just did. And then we'll talk about, before 12:15, I want to take some questions from you. But right before that, I want to talk about how do you bring this into the church? What's involved in that? And then have some Q&A. So, think about your questions you've got there right now. Maybe I'd love to. That's all right. I mean, if I had time, I'd want to hear from you and say, what did you learn about yourself and what you just did? It's a great question. I hope you shared it with the person. What did you learn about yourself and then about your leadership? I saw a lot of folks just came to me with just lights coming on. And let me just start. I'm just here on the top of page 7 to kind of give you a framework about taking responsibility. Now, when you're a child and God births us into a family at a moment in time, we don't have any control of that. I mean, things happen, right? We're growing up. But as we grow into adults, we have choices on how we manage that, how we look at it, how we frame it. And if we'll bring it to God and have the courage to look at it, it's an opportunity for God to take it and weave something beautiful out of it. And if we don't choose the path, both are painful. If you don't do anything and you're unaware of it, there's a lot of pain in that. If you do look at it and go into it, there's pain in that too, but it comes with a resurrection. That this path is clean pain, this path is stupid pain. And then the stupid pain, because we don't want to deal with it, we end up transmitting that to the next generation, to our kids. And then we actually bring it to our churches. And so it's better to do the clean pain, we'll call it the cross, and let God bring something good out of it. That's why I like the word take responsibility. Now I know that this was painful. You did hard work. It's hard work to do what you did earlier. And so the text and the best story, biblical account that weaves it together to me is a story of Joseph in Genesis 37 to 50. Joseph's had a lot of trauma. Now, we didn't all have significant trauma. I did. Some of us did in this room. But we've all had we've had some trauma with a little t, just because of sin. Joseph, I mean, you think about this guy, what he went through. Declared dead by his brothers, sold into slavery, loses his family, his culture, his country, betrayed. Who hasn't been betrayed in this room? This guy was betrayed, years in prison, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. I mean, the guy just left for nothing, rotting in prison his whole life. And scholars differ on how long was he in prison? 10 years, 13 years? I mean, this whole journey from the time he got sold by his brothers as a 17-year-old to the point that he got pulled by the Pharaoh into second in command. I mean, we don't know. A long time passed, many years. And but he was able to integrate his story into his life. He didn't cut it off. He didn't make believe it never happened. He didn't ignore it, suppress it, or deny it. If you look in the story of Joseph, he grieves it. Remember, he weeps. A couple of different times, he has a tremendous weeping over this whole situation as his brothers emerge and all that. And so at the end of his life here, when he has a chance to finally get some revenge right back, and this famous statement that we've all preached from, he says to his brothers, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God?" He's so aware of the sovereignty of God. Do you realize that God put you in a family at a moment in time, in a moment in history, at a particular country? Even if you were born out of a rape, God somehow got you into the world. Do you understand that He allowed that for a purpose? And Joseph was deeply aware of the sovereignty of God in his life, that the invisible hand of God moves in, through, and in spite of human evil. God's moving. And so God put you in that family. God's hand was on you even before you got saved and knew Jesus. And Joseph will say, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. It's really key. God intended it for good. He takes all that material, and when we offer it to Him, it becomes something beautiful to feed nations. Joseph fed nations. If anybody should have been bitter, angry, and in denial, it was Joseph. But he stays faithful, he walks with God, and he goes, God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And I have news for you. God intends that your genogram, every ounce in that genogram of good and bad, evil, pain, and suffering is meant by God for the good of the people you serve. Out of that comes the soil for the gift we give the world. We really are to feed nations, but it's going to come out of our brokenness. It's going to come out of the soil of pain that God takes it and it becomes something beautiful. Joseph's unbelievable. He reassures them. He forgives. There's not bitterness. There's not anger. He's not blaming. He just sees God. And I got news for you here is the invisibility of God is so powerful. There's a verse in Isaiah 43, there are treasures in darkness. I stand before you as the last person in the world that should have written emotionally healthy anything. Doesn't matter. We're all broken. We lead out of our brokenness. We lead out of our vulnerability. We go first in saying, it's okay, God's on the throne. And God's working a good purpose in all of this. And the only way to get rid of your past is to make a future out of it. God will waste nothing. Phillips Brooks was a 17th century preacher in New York. God will waste nothing. You say, no, but nothing. Listen, I had so much pain growing up that when I speak, and as a pastor, I feel pain. I mean, I can feel the pain of people in our congregation because I know it so well. That's a gift that I know comes out of my pain. And I tell you, God wastes nothing. Nothing. Even your worst failures waste nothing if we'll offer it to Him. And so that genogram is filled with God material and revelation. And if you'll let Him free you from it and take you forward. When we join God, we find that some of our best material is found in the failures, yes, even the sins of our past. Some of God's best material. And, so, you ever heard of Viktor Frankl? He wrote that book, Man's Search for Meaning, and he was in the Holocaust and concentration camp in Germany. And he writes about how if you find meaning in what happened to you, even the Holocaust, then if you understand why and you can find God in it, then it actually can become a gift for you. It actually gives your life meaning and purpose. So the point is, but in that, as we do our genograms, we realize we have a lot of stuff here that's holding us back. Chains. We're like, oh my gosh, shadows come out. And so we want to minimize the impact of your shadow in your leadership. Because you see, it's coming out in your planning. It's coming out in your decision making. It's coming out in culture and team building. Do you understand? So for example, let's say it's planning and decision making. Say you've got a lot of anxiety because my dad told me I was a loser, I'm good for nothing. So I got this kind of a hole there, and So I've got this kind of a free-floating anxiety, so I'm making plans, but I'm pushing. I don't even know why I'm pushing the team. And I'm driving this team, and I can't, in some sense, almost slow it down, and it's coming out of an unconscious need to get validation, because I never got it growing up. So maybe if I can get this church to get big enough, you'll say I'm okay, and I'll get validation. But I'm unconscious of it. I just say it's for the glory of God. Well, it is partially, but it's also partially for you. But I can't even sort it through because I'm not even aware of it. But you see, once you become aware of it, you name it, you can tame it. And if I don't get an identity, because if I have a very unformed identity, because I don't, my walk with God is shallow, and I have not done this kind of work, so I'm kind of like not sure who I am. So now I'm in this planning meetings in our church, but my identity is in this thing on a level that's unhealthy, and so you criticize me, and you don't like my plan. Now it's personal. So you come after me, I'm coming after you. But I'm unconscious of it. I just know that you've got an Absalom spirit and a Jezebel spirit. But now, and then I spiritualize it. Do you understand? And now it gets really complicated. In our Pentecostal tradition, it gets, and hearing God and words, and I don't know if it's a word from God or a word from you, because you're running from something that's painful. But you don't know because you're unaware, and so it really impacts prophetic words. Let me tell you something. Because I want to know it's God, not you. I'm not saying it doesn't work through our humanness, but sometimes it's pure pathology. And his name is wrapped in it. Culture and team building. I mean, we want to create safe spaces for people. A team being safe. Well, if you've never experienced safety, and you're easily triggered by things, well, that team is probably not real safe. Do you understand? If I don't know how to connect with people, because I never learned how to connect with people, so I just do tasks. So that shadow is now in the team. Does that make sense? That's why it's so important that you're doing this kind of work. Same with power and boundaries. I didn't exercise power for years. In other words, some people, it's too extreme. Some people get crazy with power, right? But most pastors, we don't utilize it. We underutilize it. And because of my family growing up, and I was very powerless growing up, and it was just, the whole thing of abuse. And so even though I had a gift of leadership, but for years I was such a confusing leader, because I would be a strong leader, and then I was very insecure, and I had a hard time being the leader. And so Dan would say to me, Pete, he'd be very confident, and since I'm not confident, he'd come and say, I think that the church should go in this direction. I'd be like, really? You think so? Yeah. I'd be, okay, let's go. But I would just give away my power. All right, well, you probably know better than me anyway. But it really was coming out of just an insecurity and family of origin stuff, but I was just so unaware of it. So my leadership was so confusing. I'd lead strongly, then I'd be a total wimp. I'd give leadership away, and often to the wrong people who shouldn't have it. And then even endings, new beginnings, transition. Some of you are baby boomers like myself. We got to hand over to the next generation leadership and empower them, but we can't because we're unaware. Because that triggers all kinds of things about our identity and our unresolved family of origin issues, and I'll tell you, when I was handing over church leadership to a young guy, this young whippersnapper, 37 years old, who was cool and skinny jeans and all that, and popular with the young people and all that. And all I could hear is my mother's voice, You loser. They're going to throw you out, and you're going to be on the side of a road. They're going to treat you like garbage, and don't trust anybody. Italians don't trust anybody. Don't trust these people. Once you give up power, they're going to nail you to the wall, And, oh my God, but I know these voices coming to me, You can read about it at the end of the book. At the end of the Emotionally Leader book, I talk about it. It's a case study. Because I think it's a summary. It brings together your whole inner life, something that's that dramatic as succession. And so important. So again, back to the elephants in the room. So often we don't confront we as leaders are the ones to be confronting the elephants in the room. The problem is we haven't confronted our own elephants. Do you understand? And you can't give what you don't possess. So So let's go to, let's go, this is the most important point of this, reframing equipping. Because look on page 8, this very important page here. There's a quote from Andrew Crouch about, one more comment about succession because it's such an important topic. He wrote this: "It's hard to think about many things that do more damage to an organization than leaders who have no plan for how they will hand over power." Think about that one for a while. How important it is that my generation, if you're my generation, we hand it over well to the next generation. Because no one did it well for us, right? So we think, well, we did fine. No, we want to do like Moses and Joshua and Elijah and Elijah. Okay. When you become a Christian, you are born again into the new family of Jesus. We are pastoring churches where everyone's coming into our church with their genogram, going back 3 to 4 generations. Do you realize why it's so hard now to pastor? Think about it. They've been doing conflict in their family a certain way for hundreds of years. And now you think by preaching one sermon they're going to change? You tell them, Matthew 18:15, if your brother sins against you, go to them in private. Yes, Pastor. It doesn't. And you know what happens. Conflict breaks out, and they didn't hear a thing you said. So you preach a whole series on it, and they still do it wrong. Because it's so, grandpa's really in their bones. So I want you to get this. Discipleship, local churches, we are equipping people to live in the new family of Jesus. That's what we do. So let's take, for example, you'll see a number of topics. So here's a guy who's in our small group. He actually was a mega church pastor. Came into our church, a long story. And so we had this 10 commandment sheet, just how your family did these certain things. So I had some topics up there like, you can't really read it back there. So I said, how'd your family do, you can barely read it, appreciations? He goes, nothing. How'd your family do empathy? Feeling felt. He wrote, what did he write? He wrote, nope. He was a very verbal person. How'd your family do anger, sadness, and fear? I think he wrote zip. How'd your family do words? Speaking, he goes zip. How'd your family do conflict? Nope. How about pain? Zip. Children, hold it together. Anyway, that's the answer. I mean, that was his level of awareness. That was it. I said, you've been a pastor of a church? He's 51 years old. I said, that's the best you can give me? He goes, yep. So let's, it obviously, not been dealt with. So let's take some topics. Let's take conflict. How'd your family deal with conflict? All right? And in a sense, think of your family all has commandments, in a sense. It's the way we do life. It goes back hundreds of years. So maybe your family, you didn't do conflict, you just stuffed it. Maybe your family did sarcasm. Maybe it was passive-aggressive behavior. Maybe it was yelling and screaming. I don't know. But your first 18 years of your life, you participated in a system that did conflict a certain way. And now you react to it. Like for me, I just give in. It's like, I saw so much yelling and screaming. I hate conflict. I'm just like, I run away from it. I'm just like, all right, conflict in church is blame. It's my fault. Let's move on. Like my anxiety and my body would kick in. And I was reacting against my family of origin. But you see, in the new family of Jesus, we don't do conflict that way. And so in the new family of Jesus, how do we do conflict? Well, we speak clearly, respectfully, and honestly. We actually deal with it. We approach people. We have conversations that are respectful and clear. So we teach a skill called clean fighting. We don't tolerate dirty fighting in the new family of Jesus. So when someone on your church board makes a sarcastic remark across the bow, and the whole meeting feels tension, it's a discipleship moment. And whether you say to the person in private or public, you say, you know what, Andrew? In the new family of Jesus, we don't do sarcasm. We don't do dirty fighting. We do it differently. Let's go back, and this is how we do it. Okay, so I want to get, that's discipleship. But understand, everybody's coming into your church doing conflict the way their family did it. Let's take emotions. How'd your family do emotions? Oh, we don't do emotions, we don't do feelings. Or we just do anger. Men do anger, or you're not allowed to have your feelings, or feelings aren't important, okay? But in the new family of Jesus, how do we do feelings? No, we actually, in the new family of Jesus, we feel. They're part of the way we discern what God's doing in us. So here we give permission to feel. How'd your family do sadness and grief? This guy with the zip, you'll see him. You're going to see him on a video I'm going to show you at the end of this morning, 3-minute video. He was in our EHS course. He lost an aunt in 9/11. Christian family. Imagine, 35 years old, she had 2 small children. Christian family. They didn't know how to grieve. Think about that catastrophic an event. I mean, did they shed some tears and cry? Yeah, but they didn't know what to do. So they just kind of moved on. But this incredible event, but no ability to grieve it. And they're Christians. So that's not how we do it in the new family of Jesus. The scriptures have a lot to say about how we're supposed to grieve in the new family of Jesus. We have a whole book called Lamentations, all right? 2/3 of the Psalms are laments. Jeremiah, man of sorrows. Jesus, so in the new family of Jesus, we feel our feelings, we feel our grief, we wait on God with it, and we let God birth something new out of the old. But we actually enter into it because we know there's a cross and there's a resurrection on the other side. But we feel it deeply. So we grieve in the new family of Jesus. We're not like the world. We don't deny it, suppress it, or medicate it. How do you do relationships, number 7? Well, we don't trust people. Well, let me show you. How'd your family do conflict? Criticism, defensiveness, contempt, stonewalling. Those are the 4 big ones. Okay? But the question is, how do you do it? But you understand, if we don't get it right as the leadership, our people don't have a prayer. How'd your family do feelings and emotions? Get over it. This is like a jackhammer. Do you realize getting into this material with people, this is called discipleship. Because we are a counterculture. We are not like the world. We are the new family of Jesus. Relationships, number 7. Maybe your family don't trust people. They'll let you down. Don't ever let anyone hurt you. Don't be vulnerable. Don't be vulnerable. Oh my gosh. Don't ever let people see where you really come from. Your dirty laundry. Hide it. They'll never follow you. Well, that's your family commandment. That's the culture. That's not the new family of Jesus. In the new family of Jesus, we trust appropriately. We love people. We are vulnerable. We show our full selves to people. How about, just think of sexuality. Oh my gosh, how do we do sexuality in the new family of Jesus? Most of our families never talked about it. We got it from the streets. Well, if we don't teach how we do sexuality in the new family of Jesus, they're going to get it from the culture, which they are getting it from the culture. But we're so uncomfortable ourselves as pastors and leaders, we really can't equip our people. That's why we're in such a big... Let me tell you something, everybody. You may think I'm crazy up here. Really, you may think I'm crazy. But I'm going to tell you this. The next generation of our young people in their 20s are under such immense pressure right now on gender, masculinity, femininity, sexuality, marriage. If we don't get our act together with discipleship, just try to imagine where we're going to be in 20 years. Okay, this isn't even an option of going forward, that we have got to get serious about discipleship. It is not business as usual. The culture has changed so fast in the last few years, last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, at a speed that we're all dizzy. So we've got to get our people deeply connected to Jesus, and we've got to get them free, which is hard work. This is going up against powers and principalities. We get this kind of material. We're not talking about just attending church. I'm not just talking about getting the gift of tongues. I'm talking about going to the cross and dying and getting yourself free in Christ. And the reason Foursquare is in such a great spot, because you understand the power of the Holy Spirit. Because that's what it's going to take to get this thing done. And, I go on. Number 9, what's success? Getting into the best schools, making a lot of money, getting married and having children. No, success is becoming the person God called you to be and doing what God called you to do. That's success in the new family of Jesus. So we got to get our language down. We're the new family of Jesus, and everything's different. We don't tolerate racism in the new family of Jesus. Right? That belongs to that culture. That's your family, but not here. We're the new family of Jesus. And we look at money differently. One of my daughters said to me, I want to get out of New York because everyone's so ambitious and money crazy and degrees and all that. I said to her, no, you're right. That's the culture. I said, but we're in the new family of Jesus. We're about the poor, the broken, the lost. We have a whole different value system here. And we're constantly preaching that. So this whole jackhammer thing. And just this was birthed out of a theology of trying to bridge racial, cultural, economic, and gender barriers. It enabled us to bridge the barriers because it doesn't matter your culture. African American, Latino, Chinese, Korean, Arab, Russian, Pole, American. It doesn't matter if you're from Des Moines or New York or California. Everybody's got to learn to live in the new family of Jesus. This is not about culture. This is about Scripture. And we, as the leadership, hold this. And in a kind, respectful way, we are leading the people about this is how we function as a new family of Jesus. So we've got to be the first ones to be very aware of how the past has impacted our present. I'm going to read you something from, you were given the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and I want to read you a little story about Sheila Walsh. Let me know the name. And it's in chapter 4, Know that yourself that you may know God. Here's what she writes. In 1992, she was a co-host of 700 Club. She writes, one morning I was sitting on national television with my nice suit and inflatable hairdo. And that night I was locked in a psychiatric ward of a hospital. It was the kindest thing God could ever do to me. The very first day at the hospital, the psychiatrist asked me, who are you? I'm the co-host of the 700 Club. That's not what I meant, he said. Well, I'm a writer, I'm a singer, she said. That's not what I meant. Who are you? I don't have a clue, I said. And he replied, and that's right. And that's why you're here. And Sheila continued, I measured myself by what other people thought of me. This was slowly killing me. Before I entered the hospital, some of the 700 Club staff said to me, don't do this. You'll never regain any kind of platform. If people know that you're in a mental institution and on medication, it's over. I said, you know what? It's over anyway. So I can't think about that. I really thought I'd lost everything, my home, my job, my salary, everything. But I found my life. I discovered at the lowest moment of my life that everything that was, I discovered in the lowest moment of my life that everything that was true about me, God already knew. But that's coming out into the new family of Jesus, into what's called honesty, authenticity, vulnerability, and creating space for other people to actually be authentic and real. And then finally, let me just last one, growing in differentiation for yourself, the church, and the world. Part of what happens in this process is you begin to differentiate yourself. And you get a sense that you remain connected to people, but you're separate. And I don't have time to go into the whole thing, but many of us live a pretend self. We're putting on an exterior that's not really who we are. That's what Sheila Walsh is talking about here. Not being true to who God had uniquely made her to be. We all have deeply broken parts of us. We all have gifts and strengths as well. And we come as human beings, made in the image of God. But we don't pretend. Like in the new family of Jesus, we don't pretend. We don't participate in that. That's what the world does. They project an image to impress. We're not impressed by beauty. We're not impressed by glamour. We're not impressed by money or position or education. We're not doing that. We don't put false selves out there. We're not trying to be anything. We're all here together as pastors and leaders. We're broken just like our people. But by the grace of God, we're in leadership to equip them. And so we want to grow in our differentiation. When you do this kind of a work in your family of origin and look at this stuff, it enables you to grow and mature. And so anyway, most of self that we have is a false self. Let me just go on with this. Okay, let's do this. We want to close here. How easily triggered are you? how easily can I get a reaction out of you? You idiot! How dare you talk to me like that? You know what I mean? You know, someone looks at you the wrong way. Whoa, hey, who are you talking to now? You know, I'm the pastor now. You know what? But like, you know, what does it take to get you triggered? Where either you run away, you cave in, you react. You know, that's a Jesus did not get triggered. He was very non-anxious because he was anchored in the Father. He knew who he was, but he stayed connected and loving people. So even when he got angry at the Pharisees, he was still measured, thoughtful, and prudent when that moment came. It wasn't a way of life for him. So what we're talking about here is bringing new skills to the new family of Jesus, a new language, we're very purposely bringing some new language, and then we follow it up as leaders to form a transformed community that brings a gift to the world. But I want to be very clear, new skills plus new language plus intentional follow-up. Because you're getting a taste right now. If you do nothing with this, because your habits are so deep in you, you will just, within a month or a week, you'll revert right back. But if you press into this material, it will change you. And then you'll start to bring it to your church, and you're going to find out, oh my gosh, this is massive. So it's got to get deep enough in you that you actually follow people up and say, no, we don't do dirty fighting here. This is how we do it. This is how your family didn't do. I was with we were 500 to 600 Chinese pastors. Chinese culture does not. We have any Chinese here? They don't do appreciations. The way they motivate their children is they criticize them. You got an A? Why didn't you get an A plus? You got a 99? Why didn't you get 100? And that's what. So we were teaching about appreciations. We'll talk about it tonight. And we don't do it in our culture. I said, I know, but in the new family of Jesus, we express appreciations to people. Well, that's hard. When 5,000 years of Chinese history, no one does appreciation. And you're coming in and say, I want you to start appreciating people. Say thank you. Oh my gosh. It's pain. They grimace in pain. Something as simple as that. We all have our things that are that painful, but they're that simple and clear biblically. But we don't even see the Bible. It just goes right past us because it's so deep in us, it blinds us. So again, here's the implementation. Now I want you to take a couple of questions here, but let me just, what I'm inviting you to, let's talk about your church. The application is not just for your life, but actually to bring it to your church. And what that would look like is this. There's two courses. There's the EHS course and the EH Relationships course. After 20 years, we ended bringing it down to these two courses that come into a church not as a small group curriculum, nor as a one-time deal, but actually form the DNA of a discipleship model. And they're introduced to everybody who attends the church. So at our church, you come to church, you do membership, you do Alpha if you're not a Christian, and then you do the EHS course, and you do the EH Relationships course. And you get the foundation of all this material so that you know how to function in this family we call the new family of Jesus, how we do it here. For the sake of mission. We're always keeping mission before us, reaching people for Christ. And so, for example, here's the EHS course. Now, you received when you came in here a book, a workbook, and a daily office book. Okay, 3 things. It was put in your packet. And this is what people get when they take the EHS course. And because they're going to read a whole book, and they're going to do offices twice a day for 8 weeks, and then they come in and there are tables doing this workbook. But each topic could have been its own book. It's that big. So we touched on know yourself that you may know God. We just touched on that with that last night's exercise. Go back to go forward. You just tasted that today. And in the first course, they get exposed to it. Not the level that they do in the second course, the relationship course, but each topic here, the problem of emotionally unhealthy spirituality. Know yourself that you may know God. Go back to go forward. Journey through the wall. Enlarge your soul through grief and loss. Discover the rhythms of a daily office and Sabbath. Grow into an emotionally mature adult. Go the next step to develop a rule of life. Each of these topics could have been 8 sessions. What this does is introduce people in a serious way to what I call the missing pieces of discipleship in evangelicalism. It's not all of discipleship. You've got to build on this thing. But these are core issues on which you can build long term. And then the second course is called the relationships course. And that's the skills. We did a skill yesterday called Explore the Iceberg. We did an abbreviated skill. And we just did Genogram Your Family. Imagine everybody in your church doing a Genogram like that. Could you imagine? I know churches where you can't be an elder in that church unless you share your Genogram with the other elders. You know why? It breaks all of them. You have different level discussions. People actually get to know each other. I mean, if you're on our staff team, not only are you going to do it like this, we will sit down with you for 2 hours, 2 of us, and go through your Genogram. I mean, to really unpack it. And that's found in this Emotionally Healthy Skills book and workbook. And I would encourage you to, there's a limited number of copies, I would encourage you to get this and go through it just yourself. The skills are demonstrated and explained on that. We're going to do one tonight called the Community Temperature Reading. But it's these 2 courses together that they're quite a wallop for a church, but even as a big introduction, they're still an introduction. So right now, I'm teaching the relationships course at our church. We have 212 people in the class, sitting at 25 tables with small group leaders. It's a high-quality course. They do offices every day. We meet for 8 weeks for 2 hours. It's intense. They're doing some readings with it, but we say at New Life Fellowship, we're doing discipleship for the sake of mission. We're not just doing we have small groups, getting connected in a small group. We're more than that. We are actually into formation. Come at your own risk. We are pulling grandpa out of your bones. And we're going to teach you how to live in the new family of Jesus. And then we as a staff leadership are going to help enforce this thing on every level of the church. It's very healthy. Believe me, you eliminate 90% of your problems because you don't tolerate craziness anymore. It's just called out. Like, why are you, someone will call it out. So there's the EHS course. There actually is a DVD that goes with it. We encourage people to teach it. Like you'll see on our website, we have all these resources available because we want you to teach it because you know your people. It's better. But there is a DVD where I do the introduction to it, and you may need to use it maybe initially, and I would probably pick it up to look at it. But on our website is all these resources like the transcripts, the outline, so you can make it your own and teach it yourself. We want to empower you to bring it to your context because you know your people better than anybody in the whole world. You're their pastor. And then here's the relationship course. It's called Emotionally Healthy Skills. And you want to check that out. The Emotionally Healthy Woman Curriculum, which is Jerry's, some of you are familiar with it, you've mentioned it to me. It's a book, a DVD, and a workbook. That's all about differentiation. It's very different material. It's very popular around the world. It's not one of the core courses, but it's great material. We require our leaders to go through it. They kind of read it on the sly, they show it. The men don't want to show they're reading a book about women, but it's generic material, and you'll want to take a look at that. It's quite good. There's a leader book, obviously, for leaders, and this Emotionally Church book was also written for leaders. It's a leadership book. It's the spirituality book. That's for the main book for churches. Okay, Paul, you want to add something? And what I can do is I want to take a couple of Q&A from you right now. Oh, good. What time do you got? Get my phone here. A bunch of questions came up, and oh, good, we're good. Okay, great. I wanted to take a few questions from the Genogram material, from what I've just talked about, because there's a lot of questions floating around. Now, the Twitter, we're not working on Twitter, right, Paul? Twitter thing's not working in this? We're not online. We can't get online here. Is that the truth? That's what's going on here? So you can't send in questions. But why don't we take a few questions about whether it's the Genogram, what came up for you, questions you have about how this all works, and then, because this is the last time I'll have a chance to really talk about what do I do with this material, bring it into the church. We have a session at 2 o'clock. That's an hour session about implementing these courses in your church. But I'm realizing not all of you are going to be there for that. But I want to have a little space to talk about what came up. Should I show that video first? Okay, let's do the video. Okay, let's do that. I have a 3-minute video I want to show you. So the last time we did the EHS course, and as we're thinking, write down your questions. I just said, let's capture some of the stories of some people in the course of the life change. So this is just regular people from our church that took the 8-week Emotionally Spirituality course this past spring. So let's dim the lights, if we could, and let's watch the video.
Discipleship in the past typically was when you come to church, you leave your emotions at the door and you deal with the very spiritual part of you, and then when you can pick up all that emotional stuff when you go out. You don't actually deal with who you are on the inside.
I couldn't deal with conflict at all. I had an anger problem and I had an alcohol problem, and I needed to face a lot of things. I knew that everything in my life needed to change.
I just didn't think that it was important for me to kind of deal with those emotions. My Christian life is supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be, free from all problems and conflicts.
What I thought I knew and I thought the way things should be was not the case. I didn't do hurt, I didn't do sadness, I didn't do anger.
The depression came right after I dropped out of college and I didn't have anything to do, and I hit a wall and I didn't know what it was. I felt like I was stuck.
My 35-year-old aunt died at 9/11. Our family, for the most part, we're all Christians, but we never grieved her loss. I just didn't know how.
Through EHS, I realized that there was a lot of brokenness in me that needs to be repaired. And I released all those stuff that I thought that was buried and forgotten.
The course was an invitation for me to kind of receive that healing in order for me to move forward.
Looking back at my family and understanding the things I had picked up from them, I was able to start doing work to make changes in my current relationship, in my relationships with my friends.
I realize now that walls were not meant to make me bitter, but they were meant to make me better. And that was God's way of dealing with some things in my life. And years ago, I couldn't even have done an interview like this because I was such a nervous wreck inside.
Since I've learned that it's healthy to express yourself and to express those feelings, my relationship with Jesus got deeper and it became more open. I feel like now I can finally just openly tell him the things that's going on in my life and what I'm really feeling.
EHS gave me the permission, and God opened my eyes to, look, that stuff inside of you is important. It gave permission to my head to understand it, but it really made my heart connect to it. I was connected to it. It just made so much sense to me.
I really believe that the EHS course opens you up to the different ways that you can and are able to see God working in your life.
8 weeks seems like a long time, but it goes by like that. It becomes instinct, and it's so relieving and new, as a Christian.
Give it a shot to take that step of faith, and knowing that at times it's going to be painful, but at the end, the result is awesome.
There's a lot of baggage that needs to be released, and until we dealt with it, then we're stuck. My plea is to everyone, take this course.
Okay, thank you. All right, so you all know Paul here. And so Paul actually has a dual role. I mean, obviously he works he was a pastor for 31 years before he took this role within the denomination to serve you as pastors. But he also gives us about 5-6 hours or 7 hours a week, I think. Instead of that many hours a week? Yeah. And he actually is one of our EHS course, we call them coaches, coaching churches that actually are doing the course, because there's a lot to it. I don't even want to say something about that. So he's been involved with us since the beginning of this, and done a great job.
Yeah, are we on there? It's been an honor and a privilege to get to work with Pete and Jerry and the team at EHS. But I think one of the things as you're generating some questions and we open the floor, we've got a couple of mics here. And then, do we have the roving mics? We've got a couple of roving mics too. But Pete, I know one of the common questions I get is an EHS course coach working with pastors that are wanting to implement the EHS material in their discipleship strategy would be, what do we do in a circumstance where, for instance, you've mentioned you come from a church with 1,500 adults. Most of us out here are, churches of statistics would say even 100 or less. Yeah. So what do you do in that kind of a situation? We're talking about, we call the EHS course a large group format with table small groups. So how does that unfold for pastors of smaller churches?
So, for years, this emotional spirituality material was used in small groups. And, they're best-selling books. But the problem is it wasn't changing churches. And because we realized, first of all, that the small group leaders, often, they weren't trained in it. So the quality level was just poor. They were not doing the offices with it, because the core to the course is being with Jesus. That's the core. And so we just found out that people thought they did EHS, but they really didn't. They just picked a few things from it, a couple of nice ideas, but it wasn't transforming churches the way we meant it. That's why we moved it to a centralized course. So most churches are small. So what that means is you're going to offer it probably once a year. And again, if it depends on the size of your church, in a smaller church or a church plant, initially you'll do it. And you'll do it to make sure the quality is set. Because it is a bit, as a point leader, to make sure this thing is being done right so people are getting the DNA of what you want them to get. And then you'll, at some point, perhaps hand it over to somebody. And you do it on maybe a once-a-year basis for each course. But you'll find it is a bit of work. So we say the leadership has to buy into it, as at least the concept. That's why we encourage leadership teams to read the Emotionally Healthy Leader book. Say, okay, yeah, this is good. And then the implementation is the EHS course. But it's a slow thing. You just don't drop this in a church. You want to do it once, do a bit of a pilot, do it a second time. The momentum of this thing builds. So right now, we don't even advertise it at our church because we can't. We have too many people trying to get into it because their testimonies are just so powerful. But even that's not enough. Just so you know, they went to the course. There has to be a culture then that hopefully reinforces it, and you're building on that in terms of discipleship with other things.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out about it too is any pastors in the room that would openly, vulnerably confess that we pastors love kits? Anybody? It's only me in the room. Yeah, come on now. We love kits, right? Sermon series kits is what we're talking about, sermon series kits. And one of our challenges several years ago when we came out with what we call the EHS Churchwide Initiative Kit is that we would get phone calls. I would get phone calls from pastors when I was coaching churches through, laying out the Churchwide Initiative. Pastors that would go, I just started the Churchwide Initiative 2 weeks ago, and my church just split. And we would delve into it a little bit and just kind of find out, well, what did you do to prepare? Well, I didn't really do anything. I just bought the kit online, and I just picked it out, and I just started teaching it. So I think that we're probably one of the few, if any other organizations out there, as this thing is growing, where we will actually tell you as a pastor, if you have not begun to digest EHS personally and started to live it out for you individually, and then between you and your spouse, working out some of the principles of EHS, we will actually tell you, do not introduce EHS to your church yet. Slow down, bring it to your own life, your own marriage first, then bring it to your leadership. Take your leadership through it, maybe as a pilot group, before you ever introduce it to your congregation. And so I think this is one of it's a unique contribution to the church at large, EHS is, that we have to be careful and really intentional about laying out.
So we were invited, for example, there's a church of 75,000 members in Korea. It's called Onari Church. And they really wanted to bring EHS to Korea. And they would be the church, that would be the point church. I'd say, we'll bring it to the whole country. They have 800 full-time missionaries. They got a seminary bigger than any American seminary. It's massive. 75,000 members. That's a lot of problems, okay? So we've done some work with them. They've come out here to New York, blah, blah, blah. The problem is the average work week for a pastor is 115 hours. Now, I want you to do the math of that. 100 to 115 hours. 6 a.m. prayer meeting. You get home about 10:30 at night. So obviously, this is a problem. So, we're working with a few people to try to get them to live it. We have one pastor on their staff who's actually living it. But we have said to them, do not bring this to your church. You are not ready. They're great at programs. But programs are programs, right? This is not about that. So they're going slow. And, we're working with a few. And, we'll get there. So,
Yeah.
That's very important.
Any questions?
Yeah, other questions that come up, just other thoughts, questions that have emerged out of this morning? Yes, please.
How does this translate to teenagers,
Yep.
or have you seen it work with them?
Excellent. What about teenagers? So there is not there's not like a separate curriculum. There needs to be at some point. What we've done, at least I guess just local church, what we've done is we have, our youth pastor has tables for youth. So senior high youth. We have found, his experience has been unbelievable. Senior high, oh my gosh, they have knowing yourself that you may know God, knowing who they are, it's gigantic. Grief and loss, genogram, the problem is their parents, if they go ahead of, what's happened is they're ahead of their parents now. They're doing some of these skills. And what's happened this past class we're in, we just started last week, I had 3 sets of parents come to me. Their high school kids forced them to come to EHS. Because the kids are so frustrated. Mom, you're dirty fighting. We don't make complaints like that anymore. We learned this at New Life, and so the parents are in the class. So it's all piloting. We're only actually in our second year of actually. I'm not a program guy, so we've never done like a program thing. So it's simply kind of here's the material, do whatever you want. But even our own church over the last 3 to 4 or 5 years, I guess now, us and a few other churches were actually doing it as a systemic course consistently. And then we moved it 2 years ago to the EHS course and the relationship course. We actually made it a programmatic element, even though we're not those kind of people. Because we need it in our own church as well as other churches to stick in the culture. So say Paul leaves the church and he's into EHS, then the church loses it. It's gone. And we realized, no, this is like, if you do, any of you do Alpha for evangelism? Alpha's like, comes out of Holy Trinity Brompton, and we're a discipleship model. We're not saying we're the only discipleship model. We're one that comes out of 20 years of work in a local church. And much like Alpha comes out of one local church in London, England. And we know it's powerful. It just takes a lot to do it. Unlike evangelism, you have to live it a bit first. Yes. Others? Questions? Over here.
So you mentioned with adoption, they still go with their birth family of origin. And in our congregation, we have a lot of people that are adults that were never in their family of origin. Raised by an aunt, raised by a grandma. How do they walk it through? They don't even know these people. They have no relationship. So they're not going to know the issues. And the issues they have, to me, seems like it would come from the family that they were raised and nurtured by, not birthed by.
Excellent. It's a great question. Just so you know, nature, nurture, right? My influence more by nature, my genetics, or is it more nurture? Who raised me? And the answer is, it is more nurture. No, you were raised, you were adopted, you were raised by those parents. Those parents taught you everything you know about anger, bonding, connecting, affection, words. And so, no, we have a lot, just we are loaded with people in our church as well that were raised by foster parents. We have a lot of, we're an inner city church. We've got the whole gamut here. And no, they've got to deal with that. But then they also have a lot more losses because they didn't know their parents. Some of you in this room, same thing. That's a loss. And now you got to ask, how's that impacting me? Maybe my ability to trust people. No, they do one, but there's a way to frame it out. You probably, if you were raised by your, you put your parents there, but you're going to make it very clear. I was raised by Aunt Millie. That's who raised me. Or I was raised by these parents who adopted me. I never even saw my parents. But I'd probably put them if I was raised by my whole life under 3 and above, I'd put them in the boxes. But you have to just note the fact of, I did have biological parents that are, I never met. Others? Yes.
I have an odd question.
but I keep tracking it as you're saying these things, and you talk about the bones and our grandfather, biological aspect.
Yeah.
What about the cultural, generational aspect that affect the bones in a different way?
Absolutely.
As I heard you say, you use the example of taking power and handing it to the 30-something. And I was laughing because the 20-somethings were thinking, you think that's young? You know, a 37-year-old's old, you know?
Yeah.
And so somewhere along the lines, I feel like our generation, we're trying to be a bridge from boomers to millennials.
Yes.
And yet I respect and honor the fact that I've never witnessed a soldier come back from Vietnam and criticized for serving their country. Yeah. I'm also raising a son that was in my womb during 9/11, and it's only history to him. And so there are these big gaps or these influences on bones that I would say like a break or when you cast a bone, there are these cultural generational things. Do you speak to how there are cultural generational aspects that really affect the emotional health of generations regardless, or in communion, it's almost like a marriage even then with the biological aspects of their bones and what happens?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Right.
There are some very specific,
No.
I can say as I look at a millennial generation, I look at our generation, I look at boomers, and there are specific things that affect the emotional health.
Absolutely.
I would say we're accused of oversharing, where I look at my parents' generation and I think they undershare. I could have learned a lot of lessons from their sharing. And those things are shaping now a millennial generation.
That's why it's so understanding history is very important, isn't it? Why is the issue of racism, Black Lives Matter, how can this still be going on 350 years later on the level it is in the United States? Well, that's all history. So, but people don't know history. So the problem is that in African Americans are saying, you don't even know the history, and you're wondering why are we upset and why are these things happening. So history is very critical. That's the advantage of being that's why it's so important, I believe, to have multi-generational churches. You have such a gift in this room. International churches where people come from different cultures, that's the disadvantage of a monocultural church. Let me tell you something. We need to be in touch with the church in Syria, in Aleppo, in northern Iraq. These are Christians. A lot of Christians there got killed here recently, in that part of the world. That's why knowing what's happening globally is so critical outside of our tradition as well, to really appreciate the church and what's happening, and that we're not just in our narrow world of our denomination or our local church. So I hear you on that. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll close with this, and I'll give it to you, Dan. The woman from Harvard did a whole study on the multi-generational transmission of trauma from the Holocaust. They found out that Holocaust victims, often they passed on their trauma to their children, and that those children often passed it to their children. So in other words, the same effects of the Holocaust in the grandparents, they found in the grandchildren. And they said, how could that be? And it was very easy. Because they never dealt with it. Do you understand? So they created family systems, which maybe there was no connection, no sadness, right? Whatever. However, they did life out of reaction to the Holocaust. So then their kids were raised in that family system, and that's how they did relationships. Then they passed it on to their grandchildren. Here's the power of this thing, everybody. Do you realize when you help a family or a person get free in Jesus, seriously, from their past, the negative stuff, you want the good stuff, right? But the negative stuff I'm talking about, you are free generations. You're changing the parenting in your whole church. Do you know that? You're changing marriages. But if we don't, and as you all know, we just pass on in our churches the same old problems. And that's a tragedy. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things I was impressed with, and Lynn, you said it well, I don't think we realize as my age leaders, and maybe those in next generation, I think when we view the millennial generation or Generation Z, is that the next Z? Anybody know? Z? We'll call it Z. We've handed down so much pain, they long for a church that they can talk about it. And if we have this church that puts on really cool services with skinny jeans and all, we think that attracts them. What attracts them is that we let them talk. And listen, another thing that really attracts them is when we leaders become very vulnerable. And just say, here I am. Study my life. Here's my junk. Here's what God's doing in me. They really don't want, I'm trying to say this tenderly, but I don't know that they want church the way we present it today as much as we think they do. They want to be real. And young people are flocking to churches that they can just be real. And whether large church, small church, they just want to be real. And they want to be led by leaders who are real. I want you to stand, put your hand over your heart, if you will. This is our prayer. Just as I am, though tossed about, with many conflict, many doubt, fighting in fears within, without, O Lamb of God, I come. So, Father God, seal what you've spoken to us this morning. We want to be real. We want to be different from a culture that puts on a mask. We want to take them off. And God, this is a safe place where we can take them off. So Lord, continue to work in our heart, whether it's we rest or we come to the afternoon session or go have lunch with individuals. Lord, I pray that there would be a deepening of the wholeness and peace of God, because we come just as we are to the Lamb of God. In Jesus' name, amen.